So we did take our first look at functions. Specifically, we were looking at using parameters, understanding what parameters are. So here from the previous lecture, from the previous tutorial, we had this function called hello that has two parameters, a first name and a last name, and you just print hello followed by first name, last name, along with the other print statements. And then in our main function, we executed the hello function 3 times. So we actually ran the hello function 3 times. And every time we need to send it as many arguments as there are parameters. There are 2 parameters. So I need to send it 2 arguments. The first argument is a string, Octavio. The second argument is a string, Ortiz. And you would do that with the other ones as well. When you execute hello on line 13 and hello on line 14, you send it 2 arguments each time so that they can be stored in the parameters first name and last name. A parameter is just a variable. So think of it as a variable that is made here for this within this function. However, first name and last name are variables that are parameters of hello. That means that they do not exist in the main method. They don't. So variables don't know that each other exist across methods. Now, for this second assignment that has to do with functions, I want you to apply what you know of functions, incorporate that into our bouncing ball example that we worked on last time. So let me just remind you a little bit about how this works. If I play this, it does indeed show me this circle that is being drawn and drawn and repeatedly being drawn, and it is bouncing off the edge of the stream. And then how do I stop this? If I click the X, there's a little bit of an issue here, so we'll just go here and we'll restart the shell. And doing that basically terminates the little application. Now, we did use this Pygame module here. We imported that in the main function or main method. I use those two words interchangeably, meaning they mean the same thing to me. I initialized Pygame, so pygame.init. I made 2 variables, the width and the height of the window, so W and H. I made this clock object using a Pygame command called pygame.time.clock. And the clock object lets me basically control the speed of my game. I also made the window here using this command pygame.display.setMode, and then I gave it the width and the height. So 700 by 400 pixels. I defined a screen color with the notation red, green, blue, or what we call RGB. And I looked this up on htmlcolorcodes.com. So if you go to html colorcodes.com, you can pick out different colors and you get the excuse me. So if you put green here and you click on a green, it gives you the amount of red, green, and blue. Oh, it went away. I don't know what I did exactly. There it is. So the red, green, and blue. So we picked out a color, and that is going to be the screen color. So we can fill our window. Remember, win is our window. We can fill it that screen color. But we also made a color for the ball, or for the circle that is supposed to simulate a ball. We have a radius for the ball, how big the ball is going to be. We start the X and Y location of the center of this circle, and I happen to just make it at the center, half the width and half the height. And then these delta X and delta Y is basically how much we're gonna add to X and Y so that we can move the ball. In this case, delta X is how much we move it sideways, so that would be 1 pixel to the right. Delta Y is how much we move it up and down, so that would be 1 pixel down. And then we have a loop, a while loop, that while true, that means that this is going to be an infinite loop because this is always going to be true. And so we're going to be repeating these lines of code nonstop. we are saying that we don't want the speed of our loop to be more than 200 frames per second. If you increase the 200, then the ball is going to move faster. So if I put 500, then basically I'm limiting the speed to 500 frames per second, which is a little faster than 200 frames per second. So we see that it actually did speed up. We also fill the window, the screen color. I know we did that command here. So in theory, we actually could just get rid of this because it's going to happen over here. So fill it whatever screen color we made. Specify the location of the center. So center location for the circle for the ball, it would be at X comma Y. And then this is how you draw a circle. Use this Pygame command, pygame.draw that circle. We're going to draw it on our window. We're going to specify the color. We're going to specify the center. We're going to specify the size, the radius. And then if you put a 0 at the end, it fills the circle in. If you don't put a 0, if you put a 1, the circle is not filled in. Now we won't see anything on the window if we don't update our display. So this line 29, updates our changes. So if I comment this, notice that if I run, I won't see anything, nothing at all, because my display is not being updated. So it is running, but it's not updating my display. So we need to make sure we update our display. Finally, after we draw our circle and we display our update, we're gonna add to our X, which is the center of the circle. We're gonna add one and also add one to Y, which is gonna move our circle to the right 1 pixel and down 1 pixel. This is a check here that we've incorporated to see if we've touched either edge of the screen. And then once we're done on line 39, we loop back to line 25 and we repeat the process. Now, because we have a circle on our screen, then this right here will fill our screen again, and we'll get rid of the circle that we had there, and we'll draw a new circle at a new X and Y location. And this is happening nonstop. Now, what I want us to do at this point is I do want us to incorporate a function here. So you notice how this is starting to get like, there's a lot of code. Now, maybe not a lot that yet, but it's going to become a lot once we start adding more and more functionality. So what I want us to focus on today, as a matter of fact, let me just erase this for a minute so that we can have this out of the way. I want us to place these if statements in a loop, in a function. Meaning I want to define a function that is going to bounce the ball. I'll call it bounce. And so that is what we're going to do. We're going to say, well, let's start putting our code in functions. So I'm going to take all this. I'm going to cut it. Control X, cuts. And then I'm going to paste it here. Control V as in Victor will paste. It looks like my indentation is off. Notice how it's not like this one. Python is very particular about indenting. So if I highlight and I do Shift and Tab, it indents a whole lot less. And then, so that's too much. If I click Tab, now it indents right where I need it to. So that works perfect. Now, basically, this is how you detect to see if you've hit the right or left edge. This is how you detect to see if you've hit the bottom or the top edge of the screen. Notice that you need a few things here. You need X, the radius, the width of the screen. You also need a Y, the radius, the height of the screen, and then delta Y and delta X. So you start thinking, well, I need those things. Right now, if I try to run this, I've replaced it. I've replaced that code with, I've placed that code in the bounce function, so I could do bounce like that, which executes line 43 would execute everything in this function. in the bounce function. It would execute all this code. But I've mentioned before that variables that are created in the main method, which is the case for x, y, the radius, delta x, and delta y, also the width and the height, they are not variables that a different function, in this case the bounce function, they're not variables that it recognizes. The bounce function does not know what x is. It doesn't know. It also doesn't know what the radius is, because those were initialized in the main function. So we need to provide those values to the bounce function. We need to send those values. So we're going to add some parameters, and this is only one way of doing things, okay? So I'm going to say that the bounce function needs to know what x is, what y is. We also needed the radius. And just looking here, also the width and the height of my window. So you can see that this is quite a lot of parameters. Maybe there's a better way, but let's start off like this. And then finally, we also looks to like we might need delta x and delta y. So notice that those are all the variables I'm using here, all of these. Now, then what you notice is that if I have these, I've added these parameters, that's what we call them, here, then when I execute the bounce function on line 43, I need to send those values to the bounce function. So I would here type, I need to send it whatever x is, y, or the radius, the width and the height, and delta x and delta y. And now if I run this, notice that we got an error, and then the ball is definitely not moving. So let's look at our error. Rand is not defined. I put rand instead of radius. Let me run it one more time. Delta y, oh, I misspelled delta y. So clearly we need to do this correct. So let's go and do that. Okay, now something happened, but it didn't bounce off the edge. So it worked, it just didn't bounce off the edge. And the reason is because of line 7 here. We're saying that delta x, if you hit the right edge or the left edge, we're going to make delta x, we're going to multiply by -1. If you hit the top or the bottom edge, then we're going to make delta y, we're going to multiply it by -1. Multiplying by -1 basically changes the sign. But the main function doesn't know that we multiplied it by -1. So we're not communicating that to our main function. Now, this is a little bit of a new concept, and that's the objective here for me to introduce something new. And that is the fact that a function can send information back. So on line 43, when I execute the bounce function, I send all this information, I send it to the bounce function, and it does something with it right here. It creates it recalculates delta x and delta y if necessary, but then the bounce function doesn't give that information back to the main function. And what we can do is we can add what we call a return statement. So we would say return. We can return delta x and also delta y. And we can do that by putting a comma between the two, delta x, comma, delta y, which means that when we execute the bounce function, we're going to get those values back. And we would store those in delta x, comma, delta y is equal to. This means that delta x and delta y is going to equal what the bounce function gives me when I give it all this. And so the delta, the bounce function will also return the new delta x and delta y, with the understanding that it's only new if this condition is true or if this condition is true. And so if I run this, now it does bounce, just like it did before. Now you might say to yourself, well, this is a lot more work and it's a little more confusing. And I guess, okay, maybe. But you start noticing that at this point, we have this function that can let a bounce ball, I said that backwards. We have this function that can let a ball bounce off any edge of the screen. And so if I was to make a new ball, so I wanted to have two balls, and I wanted to bounce off the edge of the screen, then I wouldn't have to write all this code all over again for that new ball. I wouldn't have to. I could just use this bounce function, call it, and have that be the code that takes care of bouncing off the edge. I'm going to talk about that in the next short video so you can see how it benefits us to write this code inside of this bounce function.